didn't even see any.
But we're live now.
Awesome.
So.
I'm excited.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, there might be people, we have a slight delay we were just talking about, so we don't know if there's anybody here or not, but if you are, welcome. I'm Brandon Tessers, LCPC.
I'm Emily. I'm Emily Kircher-Morris. I'm a licensed professional counselor. I'm in St. Louis, and I host the Neurodiversity podcast. So Brandon and I have been talking and just kind of getting really excited and recognizing like that it feels like it would just be really nice to have kind of a community of clinicians and professionals that we could really kind of connect with.
Absolutely. Yeah, we met a few years back at a National Association for Gifted Children conference. Yeah. And I think, wasn't I like on your podcast for like the second episode?
You were like one of the very first guests. Did you? And I was trying to remember, you did the one with video games, didn't you? On video gaming?
Yeah. Yeah. Back then, I mean, I still get requests to talk about like digital media and video games and stuff these days, but not as much as back then. It was like all the time.
Yeah. It was, that was one of our very first episodes. That was after we met at the conference out in Charlotte, I think. Yep. And I attended one of your sessions, and you had a couple of other colleagues there who also ended up being guests on the podcast with us.
And then we kind of just connected over the years because we both shifted focus into neurodiversity, which is why we're here talking about neurodiversity.
Yeah. Well, and there just aren't a lot of mental health professionals who, I think it's growing, but in general, the medical model that we base so much of what we do, it doesn't always align really well with the neurodiversity framework. Yeah. And I know for me, so I've got a counseling practice that's here in St. Louis, and I've got 7 other counselors who work here with me, but I'm the one who's kind of really in that world all the time. And so I'm often kind of sharing information and, helping people kind of build their awareness. But it would be really awesome to have just some other clinicians to have that peer consultation, to be able to talk through like all the different things that can kind of come along with it.
I think, this conversation, this peer consultation group, and we'll talk a lot today about what that is. And I'll say, by the way, for any of you who are here, wherever, whether Twitch, Facebook, YouTube, whatever, if you want to post anything in the chat, questions or comments, whatever.
Anything. Or even just say hi, so we know that you're there.
Yeah, so we don't feel like we're talking into the void.
Yeah.
But the putting together the peer consultation group kind of arose out of 2 things. One, I run my own practice called Effective Artistry. That's the channel that we're on right now in the Chicagoland area. Hello. And there's a ethical requirement for therapists to have supervision, but when you are the supervisor, we put together what we call peer consultation groups. And I guess most of you who are here know that stuff. I don't know. I'm just used to explaining things.
No, I think it's good because I think, it's like we sent this out to our mailing list, which is very large. And so there may be people who aren't quite as familiar and maybe just curious, or maybe just happening across this on their Facebook feed.
Yeah.
So
it's partly helping each other in terms of like, supervision, consultation, talking cases and things like that. But also partly what Emily was talking about, that neurodiversity is a relatively like new and vaguely defined kind of field, maybe not the right word, but and there's a lot of us that are just kind of exploring it and figuring it out. So we want to all come together and kind of explore it and figure it out together, especially when we have a lot of overlap, but some differences. So we have different kind of specialties, right? You focus more on working with younger people.
Yeah, I work with individuals. So, my background, so I worked as a gifted ed teacher and, and a school counselor. So a lot of my background is in younger individuals, but I also work a lot with adults too, now that I'm in my clinical practice. And so, and it's interesting coming from the gifted world, when I entered this field of mental health, I didn't realize, I knew I was going to be working with twice exceptional people. That was kind of my hope and my intent, but I never realized that neurodiversity, because it wasn't even a really term that I was familiar with at the time, but especially autism and ADHD and all of these other pieces would become such a focus and specialization, to the point where I would say that's sometimes even just a broader range than just the giftedness, because there's so much overlap in some of those areas. I see a couple other people, Daniela and Kai and Michelle. Hey, thanks for saying hey.
Well,
So yeah, so I think that was kind of the thing, is like, I'm always, I mean, obviously through the podcast, I've got a lot of opportunities to talk to folks and learn a lot, but I don't really have an opportunity too often to speak with other clinicians who are working with similar populations, who might have ideas and feedback, or also just the opportunity really in a safe and small environment to talk about some of the issues that we face as neurodivergent people, and clinicians. Not that I think this group is necessarily for people who specifically are also neurodivergent, but I think there's often an overlap there.
Oh yeah, for sure. And of course, that's part of what we're talking about with neurodiversity, is what exactly qualifies as neurodivergent and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, we both happen to, well, I like to say identify as neurodivergent, as opposed to diagnosis. And so I think there is some help in that. I don't know. I think when we were emailing back and forth for so long, every email started with like, sorry, it's been so long since each of us to the other, sorry, it's been so long. Because it's just, things get away from us in the culture of things, like everything's so fast paced. So it's nice to be able to communicate with other people who are more understanding of that. And I think that clients feel that way too, for sure.
Yeah. So I see Daniela's question here. She's asking about being a developmental pediatrician interested in neurodiversity. And, I think, I don't know specifically that I think we're kind of open to what this group may or may not be, kind of depending on the people who are most interested in participating.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to say like, oh no, this is, not going to be a fit, or yes, it is. I think it just kind of is an evolution. And ultimately this is kind of a pilot program. We're just kind of trying something to see if people are interested, what works, what doesn't. And I think, there's some potential in the future, who knows what exactly that might be, to either expand or broaden or refine in various ways.
I mean, we both have tons of goals. We've been talking about it. And I kind of, one of the frameworks I use with clients all the time is the idea to beat, right? Like that you come up with your best idea and you move forward with that, knowing that if better ideas come along, you're open to them, right? So I think for us, the idea of the therapist peer consultation group is the idea to beat. We're putting it out there in that way, as to like let people know what's going on and help people to be able to identify whether it's something they might be interested in, not necessarily in an exclusive way that you must be a therapist.
Right.
Because I'm saying the same thing.
Yeah, no. I mean, I think it's good. I mean, well, and I think that's really something that you and I hadn't even necessarily discussed specifically in our planning stages. And so
yeah, we're kind of figuring this all out. And so we'll talk, maybe we should shift into talking a bit about what it is.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then we got a question, which is great.
Yeah.
So the bare bones of it is this, and really we're figuring it out as we go along. Both of us, we set this date for the Q&A, and then earlier this week we reached out to each other and said, oh crap, it's this week already.
As I sent the email out frantically yesterday. Yeah. So thank you for those of you who ended up showing up here. You're maybe our kind of people.
Yeah. And just so that everybody who's here in the chat, like if you're on Facebook, the comments come under your Facebook name. On YouTube, it comes under your Google account. And on Twitch, it comes under your Twitch account. So just be aware of that, and that this is saved as a VOD afterwards so people can look at it. Yeah. But yeah, let's talk a bit about what we've come to so far.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, yeah. Why don't we, the basic framework maybe is a good place to start. Do you want to talk about what we've discussed there?
So what we're going to be doing is the first Thursday of every month from 10:30 a.m. to noon Central Time. So during this time, this is the first Thursday of December. That's why we're doing it here. So the first Thursday of every month, 10:30 a.m. to noon Central Time, we'll all get together, everybody who's in the group. And we wanted to start this. I mean, of course, we want it to be as big and as inclusive as possible, but we're looking at the format and piloting things. So the idea is that we'll have a group of 8, including the 2 of us. So 6 other people joining us to start, and then see where it goes from there. We have an application, right? Which is,
I was just pulling that up. And so
not in a competitive sense of like try and beat each other out, but just so that to give information to each other about whether or not this is a fit for people.
Yeah. And I think also, there are just a lot of, it is a fluid situation. And we want to be as absolutely as inclusive as possible. And that might mean, again, I don't know exactly what role this might take on in the future, but we might have other groups that, if we have such a great response that people are really invested and want to participate. I think probably not immediately. We're hoping to start in January, first Thursday of January. But that doesn't necessarily mean that wouldn't even just be a few months down the line. So even if you're listening and you're like, well, I don't know if I can commit to that particular time, or I'm not sure if this is a good fit. If you're interested, if it's piquing your interest and you're thinking, yeah, this sounds like something I'm interested in, I would encourage you to go ahead and, go ahead and complete the application form and kind of give us a little information. And ultimately what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to find, a group of like-minded people who probably have work with, I don't know. We'll just have to see what it is. And ultimately, I was kind of thinking about it, depending on what the response is. I mean, we may end up like kind of drawing names out of a hat or something. I mean, I don't want to.
Yeah.
It's not. We don't want it to be competitive, or we don't want it to be like, we're not. It's not like a.
I think gatekeeping is particularly difficult for neurodivergent people. So neither one of us is going to be comfortable saying no to, so I guess that's a good lens to put it through, is that we were just trying to make guesses about what this is going to be and build it around that. And then we'll see what happens and adjust as we go along. But yeah, the initial concept is one of these meetings per month, first Thursday of the month. And we did want to talk about people committing for the full year so that a group can kind of develop without having to worry about people coming in and going out, and we can shift focus from 1 week or 1 month to the next, knowing that turns will come around and things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. The only
we can have build that sense of community that I think we're looking for, and that sense of trust, and being able to talk through cases or I mean, there's so many questions sometimes that I have that's like I end up scouring the internet. And I found that occasionally it's like I talk to people like Brandon or whoever, and it's like you just start talking. It's like, oh, and that sparks this idea and this idea. And it was interesting. I was at a American Counseling Association conference, I don't know, 5 or 6 or I don't know, however many years ago. It wasn't that long ago, but they had, I believe it was Irvin Yalom speaking. And is that who it was? I don't remember. I've been to a few of those conferences. Anyway, it was one of the main keynotes, and they were interviewing one of these, pioneers in the field that had just been, everybody knows. And what they were saying is essentially, having a strong peer consultation group is one of the most effective tools for professional development and professional identity, and, not being an island, and making sure that you're providing the best care for your clients.
Yeah. Well, I mean, anybody who runs a private therapeutic practice knows, but anybody in any position of where they are leading a group of people knows that it's not that there's not value in what the people that you're supervising or leading bring to you. Of course there is, but there's a relationship there that makes it so that there are some things that just don't work in that setting. So having access to peers is always important, regardless of like the fact that we're all kind of exploring and developing something that, I'm one of the people I follow on Twitter that I think of as really an interesting thinker in neurodiversity, who's been talking a lot this week. Mick is his name. I should look up his handle. If I'm using the right pronoun, but that 15 years from now, there are going to be neurodiversity studies, majors at colleges, right? That we're all kind of figuring this out, but it's a bit of a window, right? Like things are going to start to get codified more. And so we want to make sure that we're developing as individuals and as a community as much as we can.
Yeah. Yeah. I know it was interesting. We sent the email out yesterday, and immediately I got some different, we've got some comments on some of the posts that we put up, and then also a few questions through replies to the email. One of the questions was whether or not there was a cost associated with it. And basically, what Brandon and I have kind of decided is that this is not about the money, but we are asking for kind of a suggested donation of $150, which covers the year. And ultimately, I think we're just going to kind of set that money aside to perhaps use it, I don't know,
And just to
scholarship
clarify,
in the future, or, I don't know what,
right. And it's a fee that Emily and I are each going to be paying too. It's not,
yes.
it's not being paid to us. It's the idea is that we're all kind of collecting some, not a lot, but some finances in a pool that we can utilize to develop the things that we're going to be working on developing. Maybe that means paying speakers, or who knows, we'll figure it out. But certainly, like you said, not a barrier to entry for anybody, but just, if possible, the ideal is that we have some resources as a group that we can use.
And I think also it's just a benefit of being able to, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I've done a lot of different events. I mean, I have a nonprofit that's here in the St. Louis area, and I've got a couple other things. And one of the things that I've known, and I don't know, maybe some of you who are also clinicians, if you've ever worked like in a place that had either a sliding scale or did pro bono work, there is a benefit to assigning a value, and having a little bit of an investment in something. There's kind of that psychological piece to it. And so I think that also is kind of just,
skin in the game kind of.
Yeah. And I mean, I know that it's so easy. Like if I've signed up to go do something and it's free, and then I'm like, I don't feel like going tonight. I've kind of got a headache, or I'm kind of tired, or whatever. But if I've paid for it, even if it's nominal, I'm much more likely to follow through. So multiple factors there for that. But again, hopefully not to be a barrier for anybody.
Right. I think kind of the theme we keep coming back to is, if this is interesting to you at all, let us know. And even if there's not currently a fit or whatever, we'll figure something out, because we're trying to build a community. How would we turn people away? And I think that's about what we've determined. That's about the extent of what we've already kind of, like, as far as logistically figured out or decided on.
Yeah. I don't know how, I just sent you the link over here in the private chat, Brandon. I don't know. That's the link to the application form. I'm not entirely sure. I don't see a way that I can share that. Can you do that on your end?
Probably. Usually when I stream, I have Cecil, who is a great resource and friend and, staff member, partner of mine, does the producing of this. I'm not actually sure how to do all this, but I think I can figure it out.
And if not, we can put it in, we'll go through and we'll put it in the comments of all of the videos. There you go.
That's a banner. I'm going to also put it in the comments, and then that way it'll be.
Okay, you can put it in the comments. I couldn't seem to see a way to do that. So, perfect. There it is.
There
awesome. Yeah. So what questions does everybody have? I mean, if you're there and you come up with any questions, I see, let's see. I see Lisa's asking, as a school psychologist, I think, again, if you feel like this would be something of value to you in your professional development, I would suggest that you go ahead and apply. There is a section on there for some additional comments. Here,
I'll put this question up. I think I can do that. There you go. Yeah, is the goal to discuss individual cases that come up for each clinician? I guess I don't need to read it. Well, maybe. Or plan bigger picture projects together. And I think the answer is both, kind of, right? Like, it is about us developing and working through things as individual practitioners, but also what do we want to develop for this community, this population?
Yeah. And my thought is, I think this is Mommy Z. I think that's the same person who mentioned being a developmental pediatrician up there. Yeah. I mean, my thought would be, it might be interesting to have some different voices. And so if you're working with, patients who are neurodivergent, and having some of that cross communication between fields might be really, really interesting. And I think ultimately, to me, while the goal is for this to be a collaborative process and not an instructional process, I think we could learn from each other, and just talking about, what are the things that we're seeing in the counseling office? What are the things that you're seeing in the medical office? And how can we overall just kind of advocate for neurodivergent people and, all of those things.
I think, to me, neurodiversity, because it's a relatively new word to the collective consciousness, I suppose. And people have different definitions of what it means. For me, I think one of the most important parts of neurodiversity, something that's implicit in it, but that doesn't get talked about as much, is communication and community. The idea of neurodiversity being that neurological variation from human to human is non-pathological. Like, it's supposed to happen. We're supposed to be different. But the reasoning behind that is that as members of communities, it is beneficial for the community to have multiple people who operate in different ways, which is why the focus is on the diversity of the group rather than on an individual, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, we want as many diverse opinions and
Yeah.
perspectives and backgrounds and whatever as possible.
Yeah, you know, one factor that we forgot to mention also, though, is for people who are clinicians. Well, I mean, really anyone who's participating. So we will be kind of providing some official documentation, like a certificate for continuing education hours. So depending on how your state works, like I'm in the state of Missouri, and essentially, if there's something that has been held, that's kind of like, we'll kind of write up the dates, the times, you know, the confirmation that you were there, you know, and some of those other details. But then we'll provide a certificate saying that you have attended this, and so however many hours you need in your state, either annually or biannually, can give you those hours. I participated in a peer consultation group previously at another practice that was here locally, and it was okay. But the problem that I ran into in it was that, like, it was just, we all had such different populations and we all had such different experiences. It was just in different methodologies. It was just, I didn't often feel like I was getting a lot out of it. You know, I mean, it was okay, but I just never really connected a lot with those people. But I've been looking for something like this. And so, you know how it is, you start looking for something and when you can't find it, it's like, well, just gonna do it.
Yeah.
So,
and neurodiversity in particular, it's, you know, it's a lens, it's an approach, it's a way of looking at things that is quite different from a lot of traditional established therapeutic practices. You know, that medical model, deficit model that we keep referencing. So it is hard when, if that's your approach, when what everybody's doing, and even not only the content of what is said in a supervision or in a, you know, peer consultation, but even just the format and structure of it is all based around the medical model, that there's not a lot of utility there for those of us who approach it differently, right? Yeah. The non-pathological variation is treated much different than disorders and deficits, right?
Yeah. I don't know, you know, I don't know if any of you are podcast listeners. You often don't see me on video. I swivel in my chair constantly, FYI. I only notice it when I'm on video and I'm watching myself. I'm like, oh, I should probably mask that. I should probably, and then now, ever since the pandemic, though, I realize how much I do that. You know, it's so funny too. I think this is totally a little bit off topic, but I have learned so much through neurodiversity, not only about my clients, but about myself. And like allowing myself to accommodate, like allowing myself to put down the mask. So for example, I'm really sensitive to sounds. I bought myself some little earplugs, which is like one of those things that, I don't know, I just never really would have thought about it until I'm advocating with some of my clients. Like, well, why don't you look into this? And I'm going, I really am unhappy when I'm in a place that's very loud. Or like the swinging of the chair. It's like, oh, I should probably sit still. And I'm like, whatever. If these people don't get it, if these people don't understand, then it's
right. It's just, I mean, particularly in this case, anybody who's here watching this and is like, oh, she's swaying a lot, I don't want to be part of this group. Thank you for swinging yourself out. Thank you. No, and honestly, I don't know, because part of what we talked about for today was not only like information and Q&A, but also kind of just as an example of how we talk and interact and what the groups might look like, although probably a lot more structured than this. So I keep like wanting to go into philosophy stuff and stopping myself. That's my version of masking right now. I
cannot info dump entirely right now. It's not the time.
Well, so there was a question earlier that is not necessarily specific about this group, but I like it as a question, and we haven't had another question about the group. I'm an AMFT in a teen residential treatment center and seem to get pushback when I bring in a neurodiversity lens. How can I get more people on board? Which I think is a great question. And that's probably a like particularly difficult setting to bring in the neurodiversity lens too.
Yeah.
I don't know a lot about, I've never worked in that environment. You know, obviously I've coordinated with or communicated with, worked with people who've come from those kinds of centers. So I don't know a lot of the details there. but I imagine it's a much more like manualized approach,
It's clinical. I mean,
right,
yeah, I don't know what else to really, yeah.
which doesn't leave a lot of room for this kind of stuff. Honestly, without knowing more, and I would love for this person who asked the question to give more information or continue to guide us as we explore this. My first thought would be, don't worry so much about the word. that neurodiversity it's a buzzword right now. It's something a lot of people have heard. It was added to the dictionary this last year and all that kind of stuff. But the approach is something that you can just do without having to talk about it in that way. So if you're getting pushback to the philosophy of it, then there are things that you can, mostly DBT.
Yeah.
Yeah, very clinical.
Yeah.
So I would look at ways to modify the approach in what you can control and what is under your like purview. Start doing things that you can do there. And then, well, who knows? But I would imagine that it's more efficacious, and so starts to kind of spread naturally when people come to you then are saying, what is it that you're doing? Why is this working this way?
Right. Yeah. It's interesting. It's interesting how much my own view of things has changed in the last, I realized I've been in private practice now for about 10 years, which does not seem like that long. And I mean, I don't think I even really started. I mean, the first time I heard the word neurodiversity at all was Steve Silberman's book about neurotribes and the history of autism. And I don't remember what the rest of the subtitle is, but he was on the podcast. And, but even since then, really, even when we started the podcast at the beginning of 2018, neurodiversity was not even a term that was used frequently.
I actually first heard it from a client who asked me about what I thought about the neurodiversity paradigm. And they were really early on that. I think that was probably, no, actually it was probably about 2015, 2016. And Neurotribes is the book that kind of most popularized the concept. Although I always like when Neurotribes comes up, especially to make sure to note that the term was developed by a woman, Judith Singer.
Right. She's Australian.
Yeah.
And back in the 90s, I think.
Yeah, 97.
Yeah.
She was a master's student at the time in social work or sociology, I forget. Although Neurotribes is a great book. I mean, all those chapters on Henry Kelly.
He's a great, he's so nice. He's great. So what other questions you guys have? I mean, if you're still hanging in there with us, is there anything else that you're curious about with what this group might look like? Or like I mentioned, we will put the application form as a comment, and we'll post it some other places. And I'm going to send out another email. So if that's how you learned about this, it'll be accessible. But we're hoping to kind of figure out and finalize who's going to be participating really within the next few weeks so that we can start in January.
Yeah, what would be the date, actually? I didn't even look this up. What's the first Thursday of January? Is the 6th, January 6th at 10:30 to noon Central. Yeah, hit us up with your questions. As you're sharing, I am realizing it is more that the treatment center has to stay in line with insurance so they can't fully be neurodiverse.
That's a good topic of conversation.
Yeah. It's a great topic of conversation. Well, maybe it's occurring to me that we haven't talked that much about what neurodiversity is, at least because it is something that people define differently, that maybe it would be helpful for us to kind of put out there what our way of approaching this is. And I don't think it's exactly the same, by the way, because I don't think that's the point, that we all need to have the exact same view of this, but just that we're focused on the same kind of goals, aims, Do you want to talk a bit about neurodiversity?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, my conceptualization of neurodiversity is just that for so long we have pathologized people who are just different, and understanding that, like you mentioned earlier, Brandon, that variation is a normal part of human development. And when we, as a society, continually try to change a person's neurodivergence through behavioral methods or societal expectations or whatever it is, not only are we causing trauma, but we're also not providing them with an opportunity to live their best life. And I look at it a lot from the social model of disability standpoint, through that lens, as in, I think it's fair to say ADHD, autism, all of these things, there are clearly impairments that are a part of those. And that's like, I think that's a fair thing to say. However, it's not until society fails to make the accommodations that it becomes a disability. And if we are able to find ways to accommodate and find ways for people to be self-aware and understand themselves and what they need, they can be extremely successful and happy. But not only does that require from us as clinicians an ability to empower our clients, but there's also kind of this push to change society in some way, which is a big task, but I see the change happening and I'm excited to be a part of that process.
Yeah. And it's beneficial to everyone, you know?
Mhm.
Yeah. So I'll say my answer just because it's different language, but it's pretty much the same thing, right? That I view it as an approach that focuses on non-pathological variation in neurological functioning, that things, we behave differently, we operate differently, our brains operate differently, and that those differences are situationally advantageous or disadvantageous, right? That if it was all bad, then yeah, we want to call that a pathology. And if it was all good, then, whatever, superpower conversation. And it's neither. It depends on what you're trying to do and the context in which you're trying to do it. And that social model of disability especially comes in terms of what are we asking people to do and in what context are we asking people to do it. So it's a lot about, to me, what a lot of people will call like subtractive thinking or even first principles thinking, questioning those baseline assumptions of like, oh, everyone must do blank, or, you have to X, Y, or Z. And we need to go back up and say, well, why? What is it about that is beneficial? This is something that like neurodivergent people often are very good at on their own, is we ask why a lot because we've been instructed to do things and we do them and then we don't get the results that people anticipated we would get from doing it that way.
Mm-hmm.
Especially if you take things literally, which a lot of us do, especially when we're young. And so we learn pretty quickly, like, don't tell me what to do, tell me what we're trying to accomplish, and then I can figure out how we're getting there.
I'll get there. Yeah, absolutely.
I always give the example that, so I'm 6'5", which you can't tell on the video, but I'm very tall. And people will say that's so great, you're tall. And it is great when I'm trying to reach something from a high shelf. And it's terrible when I'm flying across the ocean in coach or when I'm trying to find clothes at the store. That anything that naturally varies among humans has things that it benefits.
You're an outlier.
Right. And the further you are from that center, the more that this is the case, the more specialized you become, which to me is why that community and communication piece is so important. Is, a lot of, without getting too philosophical,
Yeah.
This is about individualism, right? And that idea of intelligence as a personality trait and, do it on your own. That's not how humans are meant to be. And a lot of these issues are coming from taking people who are meant to operate in community and trying to get them to do it on their own.
Yeah. Lisa has a comment here talking about the schools, which again is that's my background and what I've done a lot of work and research there. And I agree, schools are so behaviorally based and are notoriously rigid about how kids should behave, how they should act, how they should do their work. I mean, I don't know if any of you follow me on Twitter. I'm kind of in this space right now with my daughter who is in 6th grade, and she's just really, it has not been an easy transition to middle school. And even though she's got great teachers and a great 504 plan, she is struggling. And I'm, seriously worried about her mental health. She's gifted. She's very creative. She's very ADHD, and has some of the, some of those spectrum, autism traits that I don't know are quite at the diagnostic level. It's so hard. ADHD, I don't know. It's neurodiversity, right? But the point is she's struggling. She's not fitting. And I do not want to homeschool. I really don't. I don't have time. I don't have the fortitude. But I'm kind of at that point where it's like, how much damage is this causing, having her in this environment?
Yeah, I kind of think of education as like the Everest of neurodiversity. Like that's the biggest and most important. I guess that doesn't work as a metaphor necessarily because it's not important to climb Mount Everest, but
Yeah.
that's kind of the final boss.
Yeah.
My shades are letting light in like right on my face. Because it is, the larger an institution gets, as we were just talking about, the more it has to rely on manualization, right? Like rigid protocols and procedures, because the larger an institution is, the more it has to prepare for bad actors, right? People who are doing the bare minimum. So you have to make things for the bare minimum, but there's all kinds of problems with that, obviously. And yeah, I keep wanting to get, you're going to have to help me, Emily, and chat, I guess, because I keep wanting to get into this, like the philosophy of all this. But really the question at the root of it for me is, what is school trying to do? What is the goal of school?
Yes, I agree with that. I think about that often. It's like, or sometimes I'll find, like teachers who are, okay, here's an example. When I taught in the gifted ed classroom, I had a co-teacher and we taught in the same classroom. And so there were certain things that I did and certain things that she did. It was interesting, but basically it was a space issue. And so anyway, so we were team teachers, but she had a very different philosophy about a lot of things that I did. So one of the things that she wanted the gifted kids, who were only there for 3 hours a week, was they spent about the last 30 minutes of class writing down, what did she call them? I don't remember. The 3 key takeaways or something that they learned that particular day. Well, imagine what this was like for our twice exceptional kids. First of all, boring. Second of all, I have to put it into words, and then what she would do is they would have to come up and check it. She would sign off on it, and if there were any grammatical or errors of any type, capitalization, punctuation, whatever, she would send them back. She wouldn't tell them what was wrong and made them go back and find it themselves. And so from a philosophical standpoint, my question was like, what is the point of this?
Right.
Is the point to have them do some reflection on what they've learned? Doing the grammar stuff was not really part of our curriculum. Was it worth spending 30 minutes, 1/6 of the time that we got to spend with these kids every week? Was this worth that investment of time for them? How could we modify this, to help them? And ultimately, like, the kids didn't want to come to class because they knew that this was waiting for them at the end of it. And even though they might enjoy some of the other pieces, there was just no flexibility with it.
Yeah.
And, I am friends with this teacher and we are colleagues and, whatever, but it's like, but we had very different philosophical views of what education should be, especially in the gifted ed classroom.
Yeah. And a lot of educators have their hands tied by, school or district policies, and a lot of school and district administrators have their hands tied by state level legislature that's written by politicians and lawmakers, not by educators. And frankly, for me, because I think so I often talk with people about like the aim and the measure. What is it we're going for? And then what is the thing that we're looking at in order to measure whether we're making progress in that direction? And I think both are wrong in school right now. Because right now the aim, theoretically, what everybody's saying is to educate people, and you might have different opinions on what exactly that means. But then what we're measuring in order to accomplish that goal, like you just said, Emily, like, is not about learning acquisition. Like, for example, we have all kinds of solid research, not to mention all the anecdotal evidence and our own personal experiences, that homework does not benefit learning in any way, does not help. And yet we do it anyway. So why? And we have a comment there that says school seems to be more about compliance, which it is. Although, again, I would say that compliance is the measure, not the aim. When we're criticizing schools, you're getting graded on how compliant you are. But the stated aim of the school is not to make compliant people. Now, some will say that that's like the secret aim of the school.
Yeah.
But here's the thing for me is the problem with school, I am getting philosophical, so please.
Go for it. I'm sorry.
It was not initially intended to be something that all children did, right? The way that school was originally developed, especially higher education, was for very certain and particular professions to prepare people for that thing. And we've expanded that out into this model, but it's still at its root a competitive model, that the stated purpose of school is what? I need to get good grades so I can get into a good school so I can, and everyone will finish that with get a good job.
Yeah.
But that,
So I
none
can
of that.
contribute to the capitalistic society so that I can.
But a college degree only holds value if only some people have it. So if theoretically we did magically somehow fix the education system so that every child was successful, then it loses the value that it has. What it's trying to do right now is rank people.
Yeah.
And so I'm getting off on things. I think it should be helping people learn themselves and learn how to evaluate themselves in the environment so that they can create things that fit best for them.
Yeah. Agreed. Yeah. Self-advocacy, self-awareness.
Yeah. Especially for neurodivergent people.
Yeah.
It's always about the fit, right? Like that's the point of the deficit model, is that there's a thing that should be done and everyone can do. And if you don't do it, well, first we're going to say it's because you're bad. But if eventually we can put a label on you, a diagnosis, and say, oh, never mind, it's not because you're bad, it's because you're deficient. That's why you're fit. But it still has that premise of this is the right thing.
Yeah. So I'm going right now. I'm actually going over to my original post. I'm going to try to get into those where I had those links and see if I can put those things in the comments right now, that link for the application.
Oh, I put the link in the comments.
Were people able to see it?
I think so, but I'm going to put it in. I'll put it in again there.
Oh, hang on. That's going to mess things up. Okay, sorry. I don't know if you could hear that.
Just for a minute.
Oh, yeah, you were able to do that over there. I forgot.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah.
Again, keep your questions coming, but we have more questions. We'll just keep talking.
Yeah, no, I'm so glad that people were able to show up kind of last minute.
Yeah.
And are interested. I mean, I was really, really surprised that, I don't know if I was surprised. I was excited that people, I mean, I know that this is something that people want and need because I talk to people all the time, but it's hard to get people to commit to anything sometimes. And so, the feedback that just even after sending that out, that there was some interest there is encouraging.
Yeah. And I'm sure there will be lots of people watching this video after the fact as well, which is, bummer that we can't get their questions live. But if you are one of those people, send us questions if you need to, and we can respond.
And I would also say on that application, one of the questions on the application actually includes just kind of an open question, like what other comments or questions or whatever it is. So if there's something that you're thinking of that you really, kind of want to put out there, that would be one way to kind of get it to us. Or like some of you who had some specific situations and said, I don't know if this is a great fit exactly, but it sounds like something I'm interested in. If you wanted to kind of put that in those comments, that would be a place to include that as well. Yeah. I mean, and I don't know. I mean, like I said, who knows exactly where this might go, but if we really get a huge response for it, I mean, I think sooner rather than later, we're going to be figuring out how we can expand or whatever we can do, because that's kind of the mission, right? Like I said, the mission of the podcast is to create a neurodiversity affirming world. And so this is kind of part of that.
Yeah. Which, I mean, that's why we're here, because our goals are in line with each other. And to me, I think that is the thing that defines who might be a good fit for this and who might not. Is just what is it that you're aiming at? Not necessarily what is your profession or what is your experience or whatever, but what are you aiming at? And if that's the goal, then let's all get together. Let's create community. Yeah. Whatever the specific things look like or arise out of that, we'll figure it out as we go along.
Yeah, definitely.
Earlier you were starting to list off some diagnostic categories and then stopped and said neurodivergent instead, which I love, because that's one of the things that to me is so great about this approach, is that I use myself as an example all the time because that's what I know. Very neurodivergent trait, by the way. Like, I relate to that by.
Yeah, let me tell you about this story that I have.
I'm mixed race, right? And I prefer to use that terminology, mixed race. I don't like multiracial. I don't like biracial. And I view neurodivergence in a similar kind of way, where it's like people will want to know because people look at me and I don't fit it's hard to place me in that way. So people will ask, what are you, all the time? And that's fine. I don't hold it against people. But what does it really matter, right? Your brain is looking for, okay, you want to know that I'm 1/16 African and 1/8 Chinese and 1/8 Indonesian and all different kinds of things. But why? What I am is a mixture. I'm not multi-race. I'm not many different races. I am just the mixture, the resulting mixture.
You are, yeah.
And neurodivergence to me is the same thing. It's not part of the problem with the deficit model, with making these disorders or, whatever pathological, is saying the idea is that there's some like pure you at the root of things, and then we've got autism layered on top that's holding you back, or ADHD on top. But that it's just who we are and how we are. If you could theoretically change, which you can't, you can change behavior, which is so problematic when people force that, but you can't change the way that the brain works. But even if you could, well, then I would just be a different person. Like, what does that mean? That's not me anymore.
I would no longer be the person who has 12,000 ideas and is willing to jump in with both feet on every single one of them tomorrow. Like that would not, that's just who I am. That's who I've always been. And I think also we really do get caught up at, I mentioned autistic traits. Like, I have said this, I've shared this, I think, with you, Brandon, during one of our previous conversations, but so I was diagnosed with ADHD as a kid. I was identified as gifted, but I have serious questions now as an adult, knowing what I know about autism, for example. Like, if I were assessed as a child now, I don't know if I would have qualified or not under that diagnosis. I don't think I could now ever, because I just know too much about the things. Like, it's too meta. I could never go in and get an actual assessment. Right. And I went through this counseling and family therapy program, which really helped me with my social communication skills. And so, I should listen, and then I should reflect back to people what they're saying. Okay, I can do that. Thank you for teaching me that now as I'm 30 years old. But the point is, like, it's so hard. I have so many clients where it's like, I can't even really tease any of that out. And sometimes it's like, yeah, we could do some assessments, but always the question is like, why? Does it make a difference? Maybe it does. Sometimes it's just for self-understanding. Sometimes it's for accommodation. Sometimes it's for medication. Like, there are a lot of reasons why it might be useful to kind of as a means to an end. But other times it's kind of like, okay, your brain works differently. It's kind of a mishmash of all of these things. And it's very difficult to tease out, oh, well, this specifically falls into this category, and this, because it mimics in so many ways all those other factors.
And they're not part of what we're talking about when we say that they're not diseases, is that they are not independent entities that can be evaluated in that way. That it's simply a set of behaviors that we have decided. They're constructs. We collectively, or the diagnostic, the people who influence and create that kind of process, have determined, we see these behaviors co-occur enough that it seems useful to like lump them together. And we see those things respond to this kind of intervention enough that, it's useful to call it a diagnosis and imply, certain interventions or treatments, depending on how you talk about it. But I always like to say, it's the Texas Sharpshooter fallacy, which, if people don't know, it's called that because the idea is a Texan shoots a bunch of bullets at the side of his barn, and then goes up and finds the like dense cluster of bullets and draws a target there. Or the question is, where were all the autistic people before 1940, right? Like, we come up with an idea because it is useful and it is valid. This isn't to say that autism and ADHD don't exist or aren't things or don't impact you. They are. We wouldn't make them up if they weren't, we wouldn't create and use these constructs if they weren't valid and useful. And they're still constructs, So for me, my approach as far as like diagnosis and labeling is, any label that a person finds useful for themselves, that's a good label. And any label that they don't find useful is a bad one. And I don't care if a doctor was involved on either end. People get misdiagnosed all the time. People go undiagnosed or overdiagnosed all the time. Diagnostic. So I'm just saying, I'm with you. Like, if you need it because you need school accommodations or work accommodations and they're requiring things like that from you, then yeah. But I could pull out my neuropsych report that I got a couple years ago and read it. I keep it in my desk because of how terrible it is.
Well, and that's the other problem is like you have so many professionals out there who just really don't understand, and for what it's worth, actually, if anybody's watching this, we obviously are versed in this topic. You don't have to be. If you're just somebody who's curious, who's just beginning to learn, like, we're kind of talking about all these kind of broader philosophical ideas of diagnosis or none or whatever. Don't worry about that. Like if you just know that you have people that you're working with who fall under that umbrella of neurodiversity, and you want to expand your perspective on various ways to support them, this is a great place. Like this would be a good fit. There's no there's no gatekeeping there. It's not like you have to have this particular philosophy or this particular brand of, awareness or methodology or whatever.
Yeah.
But I mean, I do think, I don't think it would be fair also to say that if somebody comes in and tells me that they're doing ABA, that I'm not going to have, there's not going to be like a little pushback or something.
Well, there's going to be pushback.
But gently. I mean,
well, I'm not going to make that problem.
How about this? How about it won't be personal?
Well, okay. I mean, honestly, if someone does ABA and is looking to get out of it or change away from it, I'm all on board. If they're looking to continue it, then that's not something that I support. Doesn't mean
or if they want to come in and learn about what, it's like, well, this is what I'm doing, and how just even, I don't know, maybe
ABA. Let's just real quick. It's a
people are
analysis. That's what it stands for, and it is far and away the most recommended treatment methodology for autistic people. And just without varnishing it at all, it's abusive, right? It is purely about changing people's behavior. It has nothing to do with what it costs those people to do that thing, whether that thing works for them or does not work for them. It was developed by the same people who developed conversion therapy, and many people in that world have done a lot of work to try and make it better and better and better over time. But the root thing is still there. They're trying to cure a person's autism, which is antithetical to what neurodiversity is.
Right. It's also not possible.
That's why I feel I'm not too worried about taking a hard stance on it here, because I don't think there's many ABA people coming to the neurodiversity.
No, like you said, unless there are people who are like, this isn't working, this isn't fitting for what I believe or what I understand.
People like that. Somebody that I work with, not work with, but have done a lot of things. We've collaborated together, is a former BCBA, which is the practitioners of ABA.
Yeah. Because
we all do things that we don't understand the full details of, and then it's just about how you respond when you learn more.
It was funny. I remember I didn't know a lot about ABA, and I had some clients, and they had, well, without getting into too much details, basically a parent was asking me, well, what are your thoughts on ABA? And I didn't really have any thoughts on ABA other than, in my experience with what I had at the time, which was essentially working with twice exceptional kids, so who were gifted or whatever, any of those behavioral things, they just see right through them. And they're like, yeah, no, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
And so I just said, well, I don't know a lot about it. I just know in my experience, it's not really effective for, the kids, for example, like your child. I don't think it would be a good option or whatever. And that was before I kind of really knew more about it and really understood, the voices that really are talking about the damage that it has caused in their own personal lives.
Yeah, you're going to have a hard time finding an adult who went through ABA as a child and considers it anything less than abusive.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, really, to me, the metaphor, just think of it like how back in the day, they used to bind left-handed people's left hands to force them to use their right hand. It's basically that. It doesn't change the person. It changes the behavior by getting it. So for me, one of the fundamental concepts that I use in this work is cost and value. Anything anybody could do has a value and a cost. And everybody knows that value varies from person to person. You might care more about a thing than I do. But we generally don't do a good job of recognizing that cost also varies person to person, which is big in neurodiversity, right? That what we're saying when we're saying, I don't understand, just do this thing, right? What we're saying is, for me, it would cost only X and it's worth Y. So it should be the same for you.
Right. Just do it. Just try harder. Just
try harder, care more, You do so well at this thing over here. I don't understand why you don't do this thing over here. Because we're only looking at value. And a lot of the educational system problems we're talking about are built on that it's all operant conditioning based, incentivizing and disincentivizing. But yeah, you can get anybody to do anything under the right conditions, that they are literally capable of doing. You can make people who are intensely uncomfortable making eye contact to the point of even being painful. You can make them do it if the alternative is even more painful, which is what behavioral work, not all behavioral work. I mean, changing behaviors is a good thing when people want to change their own.
Right. If it's something that they value, if it's something that they would like to change, and the other part of it is I think one of the biggest concerns with ABA is the fact that it values compliance and undermines autonomy and agency. And you have to do this because this is what I'm telling you are supposed to do, whether or not you understand why, whether or not you want to, and we're going to do it over and over and over and over again until you get it right.
And it equates normal with optimal.
Mm-hmm.
That anything that is not normal is therefore bad, which is ridiculous. Just logically take it off of like neurodiversity and treatment and all that kind of stuff, and just generally take a person and say, what we're going to focus on for this person is making sure that all of their like weakest areas, we're going to evaluate based on what their lowest skill level is in any given thing. Then all of the effort has to go to like, okay, well, I guess I got to learn lacrosse now, which I don't give a crap about, and I'm doing that instead of developing the things that I do care about, which is not only beneficial for the person, but for every group of which that person is a member, including our entire, human species. We want people to be able to look at the things that they're interested in and passionate about and focus there. Why would we want to spend hours a week and how much energy and whatever other resources being like, no, you must look at me while I talk.
Yeah.
And like you said, the kids who can see through it and have the ability to communicate that and have parents who will listen, get out of it. So what it is the kids who either don't have the ability to understand what they're being put through, or don't have the ability to communicate it, or don't have the support of people who will listen to that get stuck there. And that's abuse.
Yeah.
We spent a lot of time talking about ABA.
I know. I've always been pretty cautious about being too. I don't know that my thoughts on ABA are on record anywhere until now. Not that I believe that the people who are the BCBAs, the people who are engaging in ABA therapy, I know that they're good people. I know that they want to help. I know that is the quote unquote gold standard, of treatment for autism. And I understand how, if you haven't been exposed to some of these other ideas, that's just what you know.
Right.
And so, I always feel like I would never want somebody to feel ashamed for participating in that. But I guess it's also kind of one of those things, like, I would hope that people would also have an open mind to hearing other people's experiences and learning from others, because I can't tell you how many times I've changed my view on different things that I look back and I go, well, that was wrong. But I think sometimes people that vulnerability and that shame gets so entrenched that they dig in. It's like, no, what I'm doing is right.
Yeah.
It's like, you've got to be able to let go of that stuff. I mean, if you really want to,
really, I think that the idea that there's a right way and a wrong way of any kind, as opposed to the understanding that everything is complicated and things that are useful are also limited, that for something to be a helpful idea doesn't mean that it has to be a perfect one.
mm-hmm.
Like, a lot of that is at the root, I think, of what we're talking about when we talk about neurotypicality,
Mm-hmm.
is that there are some people who say, no, my way of doing it is the right way of doing it, and anything that's a variation from that is a bad way. So we're not saying that either. And I do a lot of DEI stuff, and I think the point of talking about systems and institutions is not just to say this is a big problem, that oppressive systems are made up of good, well-meaning people, that there are things that are harmful, even though every individual involved, you can't look at anybody and say that they're doing anything wrong.
Mm-hmm.
They're doing the best that they can, but within the system that is, I mean, even like teachers is a similar thing. I know a lot of teachers. I was a teacher. My wife's a teacher. We met working at a school. I think by and large, teachers are amazing and caring people. They love the helping children, and yet they do all kinds of things that are not beneficial or even harmful for kids because that's what.
No, I've got some soapboxes there to stand on. I won't get on them right
Yeah.
now. And that's where, it's like, that's where a lot of that becomes so personal for me just because of my own experiences. Michelle's talking about some of her son's experiences at the schools. But, the reason I got into the field that I did, the reason I went into education was because basically I wanted to, honestly, I think this is an ongoing process for me to rectify some of the trauma that I experienced as a child. And it's like I have to kind of keep reliving this and keep going through it and keep reprocessing and trying to make it better for others because, it was just, it was harmful. I mean, I don't know how else to put it. And it has taken me a long time to move past some of those things. But even just now, just talking about it and having some of those memories, I get that, that flush of like emotion and shame and anger. Like I feel that it's just like I just felt it go right up my, up through my head. And that's what kids are going through.
Yeah.
And, kids don't have a voice. I mean, and let me also just rephrase. We're talking about kids and we're talking about schools, but this happens in the workplace. This happens, anywhere where neurodivergent people are where they aren't understood or supported. I think the difference is in a workplace, there's not as much pressure to try to change a person. They just, have to move on.
And I'm with you, obviously. I'm not usually a fan of blanket statements, but sometimes therapists will say, like, whatever population you work with, there's your wound. I have said many times, like, I try to be the person that I wish I had access to when I was younger,
Yes, that's the same. I wanted to be the person that kids and adults and parents could come to and realize, like, this is somebody who gets it. This is somebody who understands. This is somebody who can help.
Yeah.
Who's not going to shame me. Who's not going to,
Well, I mean, we've already exhibited, look how many times I've cut myself off just in the last hour or whatever, saying, oh, I'm getting philosophical because I'm so worried about info dumping or people don't want to hear me talk about, even in a situation in which people are here explicitly because we're supposed to be talking about it, or that you and I, like we mentioned before, kept starting every email with, sorry, it's been so long, even though we know that this is how it is.
Sorry, I've been busy. I guess I should probably reply back to this after 3 weeks or whatever.
It's kind of like
answer your questions.
It's like a ticking clock for me. Like, no matter how good an interaction with somebody is, as soon as it's over, it starts rewiring itself in my head as they don't like me. Like the longer the time goes. And these are not, not saying this is like common things necessarily, although kind of, but I'm just saying this is the kind of stuff that can happen even when you're well aware of it, even when you're an expert at it and help people with it and think about it all the time. This is why it's so important. And yeah, I do think that focusing on, well, in activism, we'll call it youth liberation, is kind of like again, to me, the final frontier. That you take any person, any identity, no matter how marginalized or oppressed, and you add is a kid onto it, and they become more marginalized and oppressed, more powerless.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, there's a focus there for sure. But this stuff happens forever. And again, I'm 36, I'm still dealing with all this kind of stuff, not just responses to, like, I'm not going to call it trauma necessarily because people use that word.
I know. Yeah. There's some pushback sometimes but I do feel like, I don't know. That's maybe a conversation we could get into during one of our sessions.
There's a bunch of things I'm like, no, let's not do that on the stream.
Yeah.
Later.
I mean, my thought is like I understand, but I guess somebody who, it's complicated, but there's a lot of emotion that gets tied up in all of it.
Yeah. And I think it's important too to note that, like, it's not like the only problems with being neurodivergent are because of how people treat you and your responses to those things. Like, there are inherent difficulties because we do still primarily live in a culture that's built around this idea of, yeah, if you want to do something, you can do it. You just have to want it enough. So any failure to do it is just that you didn't want it enough. And our culture is still based around like, no, you got to do it the right way. You know, math class is an example of like, how many clients have you had that they're like, I don't understand. I get the right answer,
Yeah.
but then they get mad at me because I didn't use, like I used some concept that they haven't taught us yet or whatever, right?
Yeah. Or I didn't write down all the steps.
Yeah. I think one of the big challenges of being someone who works with neurodiversity, whether you're neurodivergent or not, is really being comfortable with ambiguity, with the idea that like, I don't know, I can't tell. There is no checklist I can look at and say, well, you tick this box, this box, this box, therefore you must do this thing and it'll work in this way. You can't predict anything for anybody. And ABA and school and a lot of these bigger things that use a lot of evidence-based practice, not that I'm against evidence-based practice, but evidence is still, I mean, if you have a correlation in a research study of 80%, 80% of the time it works, that's a massively like incredible result to get. Well then, but what about the 20%? And which population of people is most likely to be that 20% outliers for whom it does not work, right?
Yeah. How do we, yeah.
It's impossible to scale that stuff up though.
Yeah. Well, hopefully this has given people an idea of what to expect. I imagine that there'll be many of these types of conversations. It'll be great to get some other voices, and I know I'm really excited. I'm hoping that it'll work out and that people will be engaged and interested. And I already feel just like having this conversation just now, I mean, I felt this as a teacher. As a teacher, you are in your classroom, and even though you're with kids all day, you're kind of by yourself. I feel like that a lot of times as a counselor. It's like I'm here and I'm with my clients, and while that is very rewarding in a lot of ways, it's not the same interaction. And so that's why I always like, when we record the podcast episodes, or I'm looking forward to this, to people who can kind of speak the language, who understand, and can cause me to think about things in new and different ways.
Yeah. I think really the biggest difference between what we're doing right now and what the group will be, at least the first time, obviously it'll be shaped by everybody that's there. But the only thing that that I know of that will be different is that I'll be more specific about things because it won't be a public forum,
Yeah.
Otherwise it's still, this is how we work. It's still going to be conversations that range all over the place.
Yeah.
I really do think that part of what is helpful for neurodivergent clients or neurodivergent people in general is to take a more like philosophical and intellectual approach. We want to know the overarching why. And then we can figure out our own ways there, as opposed to the like step by step, okay, do this and then do that and do this. Yeah. So plus it's so lonely, I think this, as with everything we're talking about, like these are universal human things. It's the degree, the intensity, the frequency, the impact that it has that makes it diagnostic or not, or whatever, But how many I certainly had and still have, and maybe you do too, that feeling of, okay, I'm the only one. Like everybody else is quote unquote normal. I'm the only not normal one.
Yeah.
As opposed to like, no, we're not making ourselves visible to each other in that way, because
we're masking.
So that's what we're trying to do, not just like in terms of the topic and the language and whatever, but putting ourselves on full display of this is how we are. People who like that will find us, and the people who don't won't, and that's good. That's how it should be. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, I know that I actually have a client who's going to be here in about 5 minutes, so I should probably. Because I could keep talking. This is.
Oh, we will in a month.
I had to start a podcast. Now I have to start this. I'm like, I don't have enough opportunities to talk about things.
Well, we can talk offline, but you can join my stream every Wednesday, and we can just talk an hour.
Yeah. Have you guys? I know you were home with the baby. Have you guys kind of resumed that? I don't know what with your.
Yeah, actually, the only time that I didn't do it was the week that we were in the hospital. I had somebody else fill in for me. I have a 6-week-old. But yeah,
which is part of the reason why it took a while to get back on emails for what it's worth. I think that's a valid reason.
Yeah. But yeah, no, so maybe that's a helpful thing. Well, you got to get going, but just, what's your like website and for people to check you out if they want to look?
Sure. Yeah. You can go to neurodiversitypodcast.com. Is probably if you want to listen to the podcast stuff and fill out that application. If you go to neurodiversitypodcast.com, you can sign up for our mailing list, our newsletter list. There's a little pop-up that comes up. And so if you're not already on there, that's a great way to stay informed. So even if, for example, you're like, well, this isn't going to work, or I know that Thursdays at 10:30 is not a time that I can make happen. If you just want to be informed about future things, you could sign up for the newsletter. The newsletters are sporadic because me. And so, usually, but it's like, it's rare that you're going to get more than even one a week. I mean, I usually send out maybe 3 to 4 a month total. There might be a week, like I think this week there might be 2 because I sent out this one yesterday, and then we've got an episode coming out today. So I'll try to send one out tomorrow, but I'm not going to inundate your email box with stuff. So.
Yeah. And I mean, as with this, and I like what you're saying about the newsletter, it's like, if the idea was we can only put things out there once we know we'll be able to do it perfectly and like hit the same release date every week, like we're just never going to put anything out there. So do it this way. And for me, it's effectiveartistry.com. What I was referring to before is that every Wednesday from 1 to 2 p.m. CST on this same channel, Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, we stream, and we just have different, conversations with different people. It's really just, honestly, more than anything, it's just me satisfying my urge to info dump.
Right.
Talk about it right now. Anyway, thank you, Emily, for being here.
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to this. I'm thinking it'll be really good. So, fill out the application, and Brandon or I will kind of be in touch. Like I said, within the next few weeks, we kind of want to get it nailed down before the end of the month when everything gets kind of crazy.
Yeah.
And if you just have questions, send them our way.
And if you know of anybody who might be interested in this, send it along. But yeah, thank you all for being here, or if you're watching it after the fact, taking the time to do that, thank you all. All right, we're going to sign off.